The Newsround on Off the Ball.
With Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
This is News Talk.
Hello there. Monday evening on Off the Ball. Joe Molloy with you. Pretty public civil wars just broken out in Irish Rugby ahead of Christmas. 62 players, past and present, have signed a letter stating they have lost faith, their words, in the IRFU's ability to run the women's game. IRFU have hit back with a statement of their own. We will discuss, and there's also a clean sweep for the Irish provinces in Europe. We will discuss with Gordon Darcy and Rory O'Connor after 8 o'clock. The 2021 Formula 1 season kept us guessing till the very final moments. Rebecca Clancy reports on an extraordinary finale, plus the Premier League weekend and the Champions League knockout stages draw, all two of them will be discussed with Pat Nevin after 9. 53106, the text number. We're at Off the Ball on Twitter. Dave McIntyre, hello to you. Dave, are you there?
I am, Joe.
Apologies.
How are you?
Yeah, all good. Think that might have been our end. Apologies for that. Richie McCormack, you're there?
How are you, Joe?
I am good. I think your internet is playing silly buggers, Richie. How are we looking?
Yeah, they told me to knock off my camera.
Which is a travesty for the rest of us, but I think actually
I know, yeah.
the sound is coming through okay. Well, dramatic couple of days. Let's get straight into the news round, because all of these stories, we could end up talking about them right at the off, but we'll get to them as they hit us, Richie, as you bring them to us. The news round is brought to you by Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. And I suppose Irish Rugby was feeling pretty good about itself until about lunchtime today, given the clean sweep in Europe, and then bang, letter arrives.
Yeah, and this has actually moved pretty fast. 62 current and former internationals have requested government intervention in the IRFU's running of the women's game. They wrote to Minister of State for Sport Jack Chambers and Minister for Sport Catherine Martin, asking them to end what they described as multiple cycles of substandard commitment from the union. Their letter accused the IRFU of untrustworthy leadership. It was signed by current players like Emer Constantine, Linda Dewgang, Senna Neopu, Sam Monaghan and Shannon Toohey, and joining them were the recently retired Ciara Griffin and Hannah Tyrrell, former captain Fiona Coughlin, Lynn Cantwell and Lindsay Peat. In response, the IRFU did not address any of their concerns regarding the letter as irresponsible. The union refuted its contents and criticised its timing and tenor, coming as it does while wide-ranging reviews into the women's game are ongoing. And in the past few minutes, the Department of Sport has responded. Ministers Martin and Chambers, they say, have received a letter which outlined a number of issues of concern within women's rugby in Ireland. The letter is being considered with the utmost seriousness, particularly in the context of the leadership that the players have shown in recent years in driving the game forward. The ministers have written to the players to let them know that they've sought a meeting with the IRFU to discuss the issues raised by the players. They've also requested that Sport Ireland engage with the players, and the ministers advised that the players, they will be happy to meet them with them directly as well.
It was bad timing for the IRFU on a day when the government handed over €19 million in taxpayers' money as part of COVID relief for this letter to land, although really there's never a good time for a letter like this to land. If you haven't had a chance to read the full letter from the players, it couldn't be stronger. I mean, they open by saying to the two ministers in the Department of Sport, "We write to you as a deeply discouraged group of current and former Irish women's rugby players, having sadly lost all trust and confidence in the IRFU." And in effect, the letter goes on to say things were going pretty well, and then the World Cup cycle post-2014 kicked off under the leadership of David Nucifora and Anthony Eddy, overseeing the women's programme. That cycle ended in bitter disappointment. They say there was an action plan, and now we find ourselves at the end of 2021 with those plans, those action plans, in disarray and with a large majority of the targets missed. Then they say of previous reviews that the IRFU cherry-picked a handful of findings. They say many of us don't feel fully confident that the information in those reviews has been factual, or that it was designed to act in the best interest of the women's game. Of the current reviews, because a big part of the IRFU response was, well, the time is not great here. We have two big reviews ongoing at the moment. On the current reviews, though, the players had said, we have no faith that in the end these reports will do anything significantly different to those which have gone before. So, as Richie said, they have asked the government to get involved. They say to the ministers, we ask that you meet with the RFU to confirm appropriate guarantees of meaningful change. They ask that the government request oversight of the ongoing reviews. They ask that the recommendations of these reviews be made fully available to the players. And Richie's outlined the IRFU response. Disappointment, they refute the allegation. the allegations, really. There are quite a few of them in there. They give more detail on the two current reports happening. The two current reports, if you haven't followed this too closely, are one, a report into the reasons for the failure to make the World Cup, and then the other report is a more root and branch, where is the game, pathways for underage players, that kind of stuff. A big picture look at the game. And so the IRFU have argued that those reports are coming very soon. Dave McIntyre, that is all-out war.
Oh, yeah, where do you start? It's an ordeal in itself, just trying to read through the various statements today and get a handle on who's saying what. But the commonality between the two is the powerful language used by both the current and former players and the IRFU. Really strong wording from both sets of parties involved in this dispute. I mean, the IRFU deciding that it was very disappointing and irresponsible, to a couple of the words they used. And you've already gone through some of the wording used by the women that have played in the past and are currently playing with Ireland. It's a really awful and awkward situation. It's very difficult to see how this will be sorted out anytime soon. As you say, the fact that this all came through on a day where there was a huge level of government funding handed over to the IRFU, I'm not sure it was a coincidence that this statement from the players, present and former, arrived on the day that it did. It could well be, but it certainly added further weight to the fact that they were going to the Department of Sport on the day that the government was handing over that level of funding to the IRFU. Now, there are some really independent and long-standing rugby people on those panels that you just mentioned there, Fiona Steed being one of them. And I mean, I just would wonder what those involved in these independent reviews feel about the delivery of this letter on today and the manner in which it was and the words contained within. We probably will never get their opinion on that, or certainly not until these reviews have been delivered. But it's very difficult to have an opinion one way or the other on it, to come down one side or the other. It's all still very fresh. But I'm sure there will be some opinion pieces in the press over the next couple of days on it, and we can maybe just research it a bit more, get a bit more depth on it, and have our own calls on it then.
Yeah, so naturally enough, we invited several of the 62 signatories to come on the show, and it seems their stance is to let the statement speak for itself and not to go further than that. Similarly, IRFU weren't disposed to putting somebody on, and we requested Department of Sport to put somebody on as well. So no joy on any of those fronts, which is probably fair enough. I'm sure they're digesting everything. I suppose the question that the Department of Sport will have for the signatories is specifically, what do you feel is not being done which could improve the women's game radically? Because something has gone badly awry here. You can't be fourth in the world and World Cup semi-finals and 8 years later not even making the World Cup, and that just to be okay, and for the players to say they've lost all faith in the RFU. So government will intervene here, and Richie mentioned their statement there, so Sport Ireland will be on the case. I suspect the players may want department or ministers for sport involved. But either way, what's going to have to happen very quickly is that, well, IRFU can go public and explain the brilliant job that they're doing to allay some of the fears. Otherwise, they're going to have to get some of the leadership group from this 62 into a room to present their plan, to present their findings from the report, and to reassure them that everything that should be done is being done, and for those players to come out of the room and say, okay, we're happy, we can proceed with some level of confidence. Now, based on the two statements, Richie, I wouldn't say there'll be many phone calls this evening. I mean, these are fairly entrenched sides at the moment. You would think we're looking at mediation.
Yeah, what struck me when I went down through, because the list of the 62 signatories is obviously available online, what struck me was the difference in, or the sheer breadth, in experiences on there. So you've got someone like Shannon Toohey, who's only recently been added to the squad. Her name is on there, along with somebody like Lindsay Peat, who's literally just retired and has seen it all in an Ireland jersey. So someone like Shannon Toohey has clearly seen enough to suggest that she knows that the running of the game is not sufficiently good enough that she's, put her name to this letter. Similarly, when the IRFU point towards the reviews that are ongoing, that wide-ranging one that has Philip Brown sitting on its committee, and then the direct one which looks at the lack of World Cup qualification, which has the ex-Wales international Amanda Bennett on it. Reading between the lines, when you say that when the players say that they have no faith in the outcome of these reports, it suggests that they've already been involved in what's being written down here, and that some of them maybe have already had contact with Amanda Bennett and the people that she's working with, and they've seen the line of questioning and aren't necessarily all that happy with where it's going. and they would probably rightly then not have faith in whatever the outcome of that may be if they don't trust that the process itself is actually pretty sound and pretty all-encompassing. It's not just because I often see when we do these stories and they appear online, and I'm sure there's text rolling in at the minute saying, it's unfair of them to blame the IRFU on a poor World Cup cycle. The poor World Cup qualification tournament is a symptom of far greater problems with women's rugby and the IRFU and how it treats women's rugby. It's not just that they, had a couple of poor games and are deciding to point the finger elsewhere. This has been ongoing for years now. And they feel, the players, clearly that the problems that have led to the really poor year all round, both on and off the pitch for Irish women's rugby, are so entrenched and so endemic that they require, assistance and dealing with from a source other than the people who've been, as they see it, so badly treating the game over the last few years. Yeah, well, they've asked the Department of Sport to request oversight on these two reports, which are being carried out at the moment, and which the RFU had really pointed to as, marking progress and really billing them as very significant reports. And the players have undercut them, I would think, fairly rapidly today. So we will see. Gordon Darcy, Rory O'Connor on the way after 8 o'clock to discuss the situation. I mean, on Sunday evening, you would have said, God, Irish rugby. What a great weekend for Irish rugby. And now we're here. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen is world champion, sort of, we think, most likely. Yeah, asterisk for now anyway. Lewis Hamilton on the radio over the course last night claimed that yesterday's Formula 1 season finale had been manipulated by race stewards. The Red Bull of Max Verstappen won the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and with it the Drivers' Championship after a final few laps of controversy in the desert. 5 laps from the checkered flag, a crash by the Williams of Nicholas Latifi brought out the safety car. Only 5 of the lapped cars between Hamilton and Verstappen were allowed to overtake before racing formally resumed with 1 lap to go. Mercedes lodged 2 protests last night, but both were dismissed, with FIA race director Michael Masi said to have acted within the regulations, but Hamilton's team intend to lodge a formal appeal against the race results. They have until Thursday to make that appeal formal. Drama to the end, Dave. Extraordinary that the 22 races come down to the final lap of the final race. And I mean, for, I would say, the previous 56 laps, once Hamilton got his nose in front and there was the bumping of cars and then Hamilton took off into the distance, this was a bit of a dud. I mean, it was a bit of a snooze fest and Hamilton was going to cruise home. And then, well, we know the rest. Yeah, I mean, I liken this to Sergio Aguero 2012, literally the final kick or almost the final kick of a 38-game Premier League season. And here we are, the final lap of the final race at the end of an extraordinary season. And we're halfway into that lap and you still don't know who the world champion is going to be. It's just astonishing. And you're watching it and there's all sorts going through my mind. Firstly, Verstappen, is there a possibility that if he doesn't get by Hamilton that he might do a Michael Schumacher on it, what Schumacher did to Damon Hill all those years ago, turn into him, because we knew that he had more race wins this season, so if neither driver finished the race that Verstappen would be the world champion. And once obviously Hamilton went behind, he had to try and get past him again, and nearly did, because he knew that ruling would be in place. Who of us are as educated now on Formula 1 rulings than we I mean, I know far more now than I did 24 hours ago. 2 hours ago I just Googled Mercedes appeal explained to try and just get my head around the specifics of the ruling that they are targeting. And for me, they have a case. When you read through it, they do have a case. I mean, the ruling does state that all lapped cars are supposed to be granted permission to go beyond the safety car. Yeah. Now, obviously, the race director wanted a race to break out. And I mean, what a marketing ploy. Formula 1, you can only think of how extraordinary the Drive to Survive episode involving this race is going to be if they get that far with Netflix. I mean, I cannot wait to watch that. But Michael Masi has done wonders for F1 in that decision. Now, whether or not he broke the rules, I'm not educated enough on this subject to be able to pass judgment on it. But the ruling does state that all lap cars should be granted permission to pass the safety car. He decided that just would not allow a race to break out, so he only allowed the 5 cars that were between Verstappen and Hamilton to pass. That meant that when the last lap began, Verstappen was right up behind Hamilton, and we saw what happened after that. And then you throw in it's unrivaled in sport, the ability to listen in to what the team principals are saying to the race director live. It's astonishing. It's an incredible product. And Sky have done a lot of sports very well over the years. I'm not sure they can outdo what they've managed to do at F1 in the last 2 or 3 seasons.
Let the boys race was Christian Horner's take afterwards. That's what Massey did. He let the boys race, and that's what we all wanted. I agree with you. The writing of the rule that you looked into, I mean, this is a real conversation between two professors of the rule book here, McIntyre and Molloy, who didn't, this is the first time we've ever known this rule that was in existence. My question for Rebecca Clancy, who will be with us later on, as opposed to you, Dave, but my question will be whether or not there is some overarching rule which gives Michael Massey a degree of interpretation or wiggle room. Like there could be, the very last rule of the rule book, well, the race controller gets a certain interpretation of certain rules at certain moments and his word is final. If that kind of a clause is in there, then he's free to say, yeah, I'm just going to let the 5 cars between the 2 lads get through and then we're racing again, go. Then that's okay. But if that's not there, then I think we're heading for the Court of Arbitration for Sport.
Yeah, I would be surprised if we end up there. I just don't think it's in the interest of the sport. I don't think it's in the long-term interest of Mercedes, who are the Constructors' champions again.
Is it not box office? It'd be amazing. Imagine them all marching in. Toto and Christian Horner. Oh, listen.
Look, unless the whole thing is live and we can watch everything that's been said, in private and in public, perhaps, but that might be a different type of program altogether. But it's there seems to be an understanding, although I'm not sure how many people understood that the race director can make that sort of a call.
Can I ask a question here of you both? Because Rory raised this point, right, on text. 53106. Curious for your thoughts on anything. He said, social media was hilarious last night. So many given out about Hamilton losing his 13-second lead and thus showing they have no clue how the safety car works. Not knowing the rules doesn't stop them getting irate, I guess, says Rory. And that's fine. Okay, people didn't know the rules. However, can I ask you both? Because instinctively, I think safety car coming out and therefore bunching the field, therefore obliterating a 13-second lead, is nonsense. I think if safety car has to come out, then the gap you have over the person behind you should remain intact. And I just think it's crazy that Hamilton...
How do you police that?
We'll figure that out. We'll get to all that. Don't you? Just stay on the philosophical for a moment. Okay. I mean, we put men on the moon. We'll figure this out. So, but I just think it does seem inherently wrong. Just an instinctive justice point. I know the rule is the rule, but it seems crazy to me that Lewis Hamilton drives beautifully for 58 laps, and then there are 53 laps, whatever it was. Then there's a crash, and he loses his 13-second lead, built up with skill and great driving and strategy all the way through. And it's Max Verstappen gets a last crack. I think that's a ridiculous rule. Discuss.
But if it happens on lap 22,
yeah,
are we still discussing it? No, it's just the fact that Latifi, bless him, went into the wall 5 laps from the end, and such was the nature of trying to clear up that crash.
I sort of do think on lap 22 as well, because imagine you've got a 13-14 second lead there, and that's unlikely to be eaten into to any great extent. I do think on lap 22 they could do it.
It happens pretty frequently, and this is where I guess all of us Formula One neophytes, to a degree, come up against the people who've been following the sport week in and week out and know these rulings like the backs of their hands, and would be more au fait with these things. But as regards the safety car, I've no issue with that. I think the interpretation of the rules is where there's always going to be a bit like a rule is either a rule or it's not. The fact that there's interpretation of a rule is letting people scratch their heads a little bit and ask major questions of Michael Massey and wonder why only 5 cars were allowed to pass by. But I think the spectacle that we got at the end, I don't think from a sporting perspective there's anything hugely wrong with it. I just think it's turned into a fantastic product. I think I don't know if it's going to win as many people around to tune in Bahrain in March as a lot of people might suggest. I think that might be their one and done, and they'll come back in a year's time if it's a similarly tight contest.
Well, maybe. I saw Channel 4 peaked at like 5 million. Dave McIntyre, am I wrong instinctively to think it's unfair on... I'm not talking about yesterday, I'm talking about the rule generally, that your lead is obliterated just because some other dude crashes his car.
Yeah, well, look, that rule is a different debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
About every driver that was on the grid yesterday knew exactly what the rules were surrounding the deployment of the safety car. And some days that may go for you. Other days it might go against you. We've seen it many times over the years, Richie says, over the years.
But do you think it's a good rule? Do you think it's a good rule? I think it's a rubbish rule.
Well, F1 aficionados will probably be able to inform as to why many people will feel that it is a good rule. It
Okay.
certainly
Because
contributes towards a greater possibility of racing breaking out. And it means that if there's a little bit of carnage in a race, particularly say on a wet day, for example, that it doesn't necessarily mean that what is a 56-lap race or a 60-lap race that looks done with 25 laps to go isn't necessarily the case. And it took a miracle, which Christian Horner had said, speaking live to Sky, with about 20 laps remaining, we need a miracle here. And that Lafiti crash was the miracle that they were looking for. He said, we need the racing gods to shine upon us over the next 40 minutes or so. And they absolutely did. But Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes certainly can't have an issue with that rule. Yes, it's worth discussing. I'd be interested to hear what the question is, or the answer is, when you put that question to our expert later. But it's the rule surrounding the decision of the race director that Mercedes are obviously going to focus on.
No, 100%. And
I'm reading a line here from the stewards, the judgment they released, and they've cited an article that says the race director is allowed controlled use of the safety car, which in the determination of the stewards includes its deployment and withdrawal, which implies to me that regardless of what the rulings are in the rule book up until Article 15.3, which is the one I've just quoted, they can all just get thrown out the window.
Yeah, well,
racing director.
that's what I thought would be there.
Yeah,
I thought they'd give I absolutely thought that the race director would have that room for manoeuvre, and so I don't think there's much of a chance of Mercedes winning this appeal, I have to say. We'll move on. I introduced a whole separate debate there just about losing your lead, which I think is unfair anyway. I don't like it, but maybe that's a good reason.
The bunching thing quickly is to allow, because it has to happen, because you have to bring the fields together to allow the stewards to clear away whatever debris might be resultant of the crash.
Yeah.
So God forbid if that Latifi crash was worse and it involved 2 or 3 other cars, then you absolutely need as much wiggle room as you can, and you get that wiggle room by bringing everybody together.
But could I give you a say, okay, I totally accept that, you've got to bunch them together for safety. Then say everyone goes back to the grid and it's Hamilton, you go, and then 13 seconds later Verstappen, you go, and then 3 seconds. It's a staggered start. There's nothing. That's a perfectly normal solution. A staggered start.
Okay, well, for a start, Joe, the way the cars operate nowadays, you simply couldn't have a car on the grid with its engine running for 13 seconds. There's all sorts of mechanical issues and computer and technical issues around that.
But sure, that's how they start a race, no?
Well, no. The guy on pole and the guy in second and the 2 guys in the front row of the grid have to keep their engines running for a little longer than the guys who are at the back row of the grid. But it certainly wouldn't be anything in the region of what someone would have to keep their engine running for if you were to put into play what you're suggesting.
I feel if I can keep my Renault Laguna running, that the lads in the Formula One world will be able to manage it. You know what I mean? I think they'll get by that.
By all means, ask the question.
I will ask. Sorry, I'm labouring the point.
I'm looking forward to hearing what comes out of that discussion later on.
I know.
Because as you say, you and I, we know a lot more now than we remotely knew yesterday. And I'm sure there's F1 experts listening to us thinking those idiots have absolutely no clue what they're currently talking about.
I am raising a sound philosophical point. Now, I do look forward to Rebecca Clancy just hanging up the phone on me in about 5 minutes' time, saying this is not worth
I'm looking forward to the Joe Molloy Formula Laguna Classic. That's going to be good stuff out in Mondello.
Listen,
Joe, if all your contributors were to hang up due to a lack of basic knowledge, your show would be very short.
Oh, David, come on. Right, let's get going. Champions League, this was fun.
Yeah, the draw for the last 16 of the Champions League had to be made twice today. It all began when Manchester United were erroneously included in the teams that could face Villarreal. UEFA subsequently declared the original draw null and void and reconvened at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Having originally drawn Paris Saint-Germain, United were then given Atletico Madrid among the new fixtures. Manchester City will travel to Lisbon for the first leg of their tie with Sporting. Liverpool go back to the San Siro where they'll play Inter this time. Chelsea will be at home to the French champions Lille in the first leg of their tie. But pairing of the round will see Paris Saint-Germain play Real Madrid. Elsewhere, Bayern Munich will take on Salzburg. Ajax go up against Benfica, and Villarreal, for their part, will play Juventus.
Any jump out fixtures for you there, Dave? I guess PSG, Real Madrid. Manchester United did for a moment have PSG, well, for a few hours, and then there were ashen faces all around as they realised they had made a mess of things. So, yeah, for United, Atletico is a very tricky tie, but I'm sure they're happy to have avoided PSG. I don't remember too many null and void draws down the years.
I don't remember any. It's you would think it's something at this stage, given the experience they have in these draws and the technicalities around them, that they would be able to do it with their eyes closed at this stage. But look, human error intervened and they had to go again, and I'm certain that all associated with Manchester United were pretty pleased by how things transpired, because Atletico Madrid are a little bit of a mess at the moment. They barely got into the knockout stages. I think they finished with 7 points in a group obviously dominated by Liverpool, but it's not something that will be overly scary for Manchester United and their players and their new management team. Liverpool's draw a little harder. Obviously, Red Bull Salzburg were probably the plum draw in terms of the sides that the group winners could face. Inter is definitely a stronger proposition, but given where Inter are at the moment, given where Serie A at the moment is in the overall European pecking order, I don't think Jurgen Klopp is going to be overly perturbed by that draw either. PSG Real, as you say, the standout draw. It will be interesting to see Kylian Mbappe going up against the club that many argue he will likely join in the summer.
Rich, I got a wrap, but it's worth just mentioning, and I don't know, a combination of seasonal issues and Omicron and who knows what else, but Leinster have 3 cases in the camp and they cancelled training today, rounded testing results tomorrow. Montpellier, who they're due to play on Friday, 2 cases, players, 1 staff in their camp. So, I mean, do they both lose 28-0? Is it a 28-all draw? What happens here if they can't play? That game's on Friday. We'll know more tomorrow. The other thing to mention is Premier League have done testing and it's their highest ever number.
It is, yeah. The Premier League say it's taking precautionary measures after coronavirus outbreaks at a number of its clubs. 42 positive results have been returned in the latest round of COVID testing of both players and staff. Those numbers, by the way, were in single digits for the longest time. The league says it's reverting to its emergency measures, which requires the wearing of face coverings indoors, social distancing and more frequent testing. Meanwhile, tomorrow's meeting of Brentford and Manchester United is in serious doubt. United were forced to close their Carrington training base for 24 hours after a number of players and staff there tested positive for COVID-19. They're in talks with the Premier League about tomorrow night's game in West London. I would suggest that is not going to happen.
Yeah, a few very quick texts. The safety card, that's what you have a problem with? It's a safety feature. Anyone can end up gaining or losing, but it's there to protect lives. I'm absolutely fine with a safety car, for God's sake. I'm talking about the implementation of the restart, which is a very different point. I'm not saying scrap the safety car. It's blank loads, what happened is loads of motorsport uses corrected times. You just add it on at the end of the race. So that's somebody kind of agreeing with my point. I think they already do it for penalties. Somebody says the F1 ruling was the footballing equivalent of a team being 5-0 up and the ref saying next goal wins, which I think is a text we can all understand. Dave McIntyre, thank you.
Thanks, lads.
Richie McCormack, thanks very much.
Nice one.